All right, everybody, we are going to do our next episode here of Ask ZOEL A Question, and we're going to do the episode on Jimmy's guitar rig, signal chain, amps, speakers, that sort of thing. So let's get started. First thing first, we've got our guitar. So that's the first thing in the signal chain. So this cable here comes out of the guitar and runs into this volume pedal right here. It's the one that's on the audience side of the carpet here. That runs from that volume pedal, the output, into this Hughes and Kettner overdrive pedal. And then that outputs to the input of this amp, which is a 1964 Fender Bassman. So the interesting thing about Jimmy's rig is that there's a dry side, which is this amp, which has no effects other than the overdrive. And then there's a wet side, which is this reverb, basically just stereo reverb in this 412 cabinet. It's powered by these monitors, or these PA amps, and then this is the reverb. So let's do the dry side first. Pretty much just did it. So it's guitar, volume pedal, overdrive, amp. That's the dry side. So I'll play that for you, and you can hear what it sounds like. So essentially, what you do is you got your guitar signal, and then you can blend it in, raise the volume with the volume pedal. That way, you can set your gain level, wherever you want it. If you're playing a chordal part or something. So that's the dry side. So now we'll do the signal chain for the wet side. So the signal chain for the wet side, there's this Suhr line OutBox that runs in between the amp and the speaker cabinet. And what it does is it gives you a line level output post power amp. So you get the full, preamp power amp distortion because it's you're getting it after all of that before it goes into the speakers. Anyway, this gives you a line level output, and that goes down to this volume pedal, and then from the volume pedal goes into this reverb unit here. This is an Eventide Space. We've got it on a big, expansive sort of hall reverb setting. And from this, it goes from stereo output into this power amp, and then from the power amp, stereo into this orange 412 cabinet. So you're getting stereo reverb. Now the interesting thing about the way the reverb is set up is the signal is 100% wet, which means there's no dry signal coming through this side. So you have 100% wet reverb on this side in stereo. And then you have the dry amp gives you all the, basically all the articulation and punch that you get without muddying the dry sound up with reverb. That's what's so cool about setting it up this way, is because you get all the great sound from the amp, and then you have stereo reverb on this side. It just makes it sound big. As we'll do this again. This time I'll show you what happens when you add the reverb in. So here's our no reverb, right? Totally dry signal. Now we're going to add the reverb in. So that's basically how Jimmy has his signal chain set up. So there's a switch down here on the floor in between the volume pedals, and what that is it's a remote switch that turns the overdrive, the Hughes and Kettner tube factor, on and off. So on the tube factor, all we use is the green channel. We don't ever use the red channel. If you look closely on this pedal here, there's a zip tie that's basically renders one of the switches inoperable. So that's what, if you don't, you can't turn it on basically, so you don't accidentally hit that red channel. So this just turns the overdrive on and off. So let's hear some overdrive with the dry and the reverb sound together at once. So that's sort of, the amp settings are a little bit different than Jimmy's tone because we're in a warehouse building. So I've turned some of the stuff down and moved a few things around. So it's a little bit different than his actual live tone, but it's pretty close. We'll talk about this bass rig here. So this thing, it's not part of the guitar signal. Basically, we get a feed from the monitor board, and it's Dave's bass signal. We just plug into this thing from the monitor board, and he's got a satellite bass rig so he can hear Dave through a bass amp by himself. It's not connected to the rest of the monitors on the floor. I don't have the monitor stuff here, but normally there's a wedge here and a wedge here. And then those are for his drums and vocals and stuff. And then there's one other small wedge just for the B3. We'll talk about his monitor board mix controller on a future episode and get some of the audio guys to come and help with that. And the really interesting thing about it, like I was saying earlier, is that you get all the articulation and clarity and punch from the dry side, and then just the beautiful, completely wet reverb on this side. When the audio guys mic it up, there's two mics on here. I think there's a SM57 and then one of the Suhr ribbon mic. And then on here, there's usually two Royer ribbon mics, and they mic each side of this, so then they can pan it in the PA left and right. And so it makes the sound huge. But essentially, all the gain control, like for going from a clean sound to a crunch sound, is all based on having the amp turned up really loud, so you can use this volume pedal here, this first volume pedal, which controls the dry side, to control the gain structure of the amp. And then the overdrive pedal just adds more gain on top for that, for a solo boost. And that's the tube factor. He doesn't really use a lot of gain with it. It's basically just driving the preamp section of his amp to give him more gain and sustain and compression. But it doesn't add a whole lot of like distortion really on the sound. Most of that's just coming from the amp. Just gives you that extra over-the-top sort of boost. One of the interesting things about this pedal, it does have a tube in it, and it seems to, at least for what Jimmy is doing with his rig, it seems to work really well with that. I've used these things like at bedroom volume, and they don't sound that great at bedroom volume, but for live stuff, we haven't found anything that's better than this tube factor. The Eventide we've used for a few years, and we really just use the one hall patch. We don't really use anything else. That's pretty much it. In the past, we have used an Axe Effects, but really just for reverb sound. It's gone in here in this rack with these other two power amps. This power amp on the bottom is just a spare, just in case this one goes down and we have to switch over in the middle of the show. So this is a product called a BrownBox, and what it is it basically will drop the voltage down in degrees from whatever's coming out of the wall. So if you look up close here, what we've got coming out of the wall here at the warehouse is 122, okay? So you can see here, I'm going to set that to 122 on this dial. And then these old vintage amps, like old Fenders and old Marshalls, usually want to see around 117. So we can take this knob and drop the voltage down, and it'll usually drop it down around 117. So it's kind of like a Variac, but it only lowers power. I do carry a Variac on the road, but I've never really had to use it before except for one time, and that's when there was only 113 volts coming out of the wall and I actually had to raise the voltage. But most of the time you have to lower the voltage because typically in the United States you see between 118 and 124, 126 sometimes in bigger cities. And so if you use that higher voltage with these amps, they don't sound right. They sound kind of brittle and not a big, nice, open, pure sound. So we use this to get the most out of these amps. And also the higher voltage will burn your power tubes up a lot quicker because they're seeing way too much voltage from the wall. So this is a really crucial thing if you're using like vintage Fenders, vintage Marshalls, vintage Vox amps and stuff like that. It really helps to make sure that the amp is taken care of and seeing the right voltage. All right, so we had some questions about whether Jimmy uses a Fractal or a Kemper. And for people that don't know what those are, they're essentially digital amp modeling devices. And what you can do with them is you can, at least with the Fractal, or with the Kemper, you can take an existing tube amp, and I'm not exactly sure how the process works, but essentially it models that particular amp and its response. But we don't use those. We pretty much just use the old tube amps and some newer ones that are really high quality. Yeah, we had some questions about that. I think I mentioned earlier in the video that Jimmy did use an Axe-Effects, which is a amp modeling and effects. It's got pretty much everything in it. It's a rack unit. And we used to use that, but just for reverb. Pretty much this setup that Jimmy's using has been the setup ever since I started working for him. Amps have changed, speaker cabinets have changed, reverb devices have changed, but the essential idea of this has always been the same. It's just different pieces of gear have changed in the lineup. But yeah, somebody mentioned they wanted to know where the airy kind of sustain that he gets from when he's playing a solo and doing those really long kind of winding solos that he does. That airy sustain is a combination usually of the amp and the dry side, the amp and the overdrive, and then having a lot of that reverb put in. So you get this, and since it's separated, you get this sound that's big. It's actually in stereo in real life, and then they can put it in the PA. So it's a really cool way to set up your guitar rig. It is a little complicated to set up, but it's pretty easy to operate. We also do use Fuchs amps occasionally, especially when we go down to Mexico. We use those. We have a backline company that provides gear. The Fuchs amps sound really good. They're a channel switching amp, so you have to adapt the way that you set the amp up a little bit differently, but they're extremely high quality amps. All right, thanks everybody for watching our gear video. But the real reason we're doing these videos is because we want to let you know about a charity called Feeding America. Feeding America is a national network of 200 food banks and 60,000 food pantries and meal programs dedicated to fighting hunger in the United States. For over 40 years, Feeding America has responded to the needs of people struggling with food insecurity. If you are able, we would ask you to donate to this organization that does so much good work in communities across this country. A link to Feeding America is in the description below this video. Thank you, and be well.